They want to create an issue of executive authority versus the third branch of government versus the courts and get it to the Supreme Court. That is the move. That's the strategy. It's not about the migrant flights. It's about making it a bigger issue. Now, I wasn't just talking at Jamie Raskin. He's a far superior legal mind. But I did have some insight into what the plan was, because when I was talking to some of my sources about this, I was like, the Alien Enemies Act, the state secrets privilege, I mean, how does that apply here? What they do is trigger a question about who gets to tell the president how to exercise his discretion. Does the court get to say, you don't get to decide what's an invasion? We do, or Congress does. Trump believes the president does. You don't get to decide whether it's a state secret. Trump says, yeah, I do, as the executive, that you don't get to question me on those levels. And now the Trump administration went to the Supreme Court to vacate the ruling, because this is now a case of what they call first impression, and the Supreme Court likely will take it. The Justice Department wrote, this case presents fundamental questions about who decides how to conduct sensitive national security-related operations in this country. Now, you can argue whether or not it's national security-related. That would be a question for the court. The president, through Article 2, or the judiciary, which would be Article 3. The Constitution supplies a clear answer. The president. Does it? Let's talk to two better minds, okay? The student and the professor. Justice correspondent for The Nation and the author of the new book, Bad Law. I'm halfway through it. 10 popular laws that are ruining America. I will tell you this right now. Elie has made something that I thought, this is going to be for the insiders, legal minds. It's not. It's really readable. Elie Mystal, nice job with the book. I'm halfway through it. And former professor of Elie from Harvard Law School, the OAO, the one and only Alan Dershowitz. Okay, so first, Elie, because you got the book, congratulations. Make sure you keep putting it up there, Dusty. You got to move the book, So, Elie, what do you make of the suggestion that Trump got what he wanted? He's going to go to the Supreme Court. They'll probably take this. And what do you think the question is, and how do you think they decide it?
Oh, certainly this is what Trump wanted. Trump feels like the Supreme Court is in his pocket. And I would disagree with your framing slightly, Chris. I think the question is not so much who gets to enforce the law. I think it's pretty clear that the president gets to enforce the law. I think the question is who gets to tell the president that he's wrong? Who gets to tell the president that his actions are unlawful? And he thinks that nobody gets to tell him that his actions are unlawful, not the lower court, not the Supreme Court. And now the Supreme Court will hear that case, certainly. What I think is going to happen is that Roberts is going to give him what he wants, because John Roberts, and I wrote about this in The Nation, his entire posture is to avoid a direct confrontation with Trump on the law when it's something that Trump has full physical control over. So if we're talking about abducting immigrants and renditioning them to Louisiana or out of the country, that is a situation where Trump has full physical control over the apparatus of government. And I don't think Roberts is going to challenge Trump on him, because Roberts thinks that he is going to lose and that Trump will violate his court order anyway. So why fight that fight? I think on some of these other issues, birthright citizenship, some of these others that we can talk about, where Trump does not have full physical control, where he requires state and local officials to follow his order, that might be an opportunity for the Supreme Court to show a bit of spine and stand up to this man. Because if Trump doesn't like their order, it's not like he can go in and force state and local officials to do what he wants. But on these issues of immigration, pulling people off the streets, where Trump controls the military, the paramilitary, the secret police, I think Roberts is going to cave and give Trump exactly what he wants.
Professor?
Well, first, I'm very proud of Elie and Jamie Raskin, both of my former students. And so they have to be right if they were my former students. And in this case, Elie, you're half right. I think the Supreme Court will rule completely in Trump's favor on the substantive issues, on the issues of who has the power, who defines whether or not there's an invasion. All of that will go in Trump's favor, and it won't be 5-4 or 6-3. It may even go beyond that. But the president cannot deny anybody due process of law. So there's going to be a distinction between the substantive issue, Trump wins, procedural issues, Trump loses. Felix Frankfurter once said the history of liberty is largely a history of procedures. So I think the Supreme Court ultimately will rule you can't just pick people up off the street. You can't just say he's a gang member. There has to be some degree of due process, some process. So I think we're going to see split. But I think he's right. Elie is right and Jamie is right that ultimately on the issue of who has the power to make the broad definitions of who remains in America, whether or not there is an invasion, all of that is within the executive authority, subject to due process.
Subject to due process. Elie, what do you make of that distinction? Elie's camera went down. I had the camera turned off because I don't like how much better his hair is than mine. It bothers me. I'm just going to show your book, Elie. I think that's a fair compromise, and it makes me feel better, even though your hair is on the front cover of the book, which kind of gets me both ways.
That picture, by the way, Chris, on my book was Fox News trying to troll me in an article, and they just made me look cool, so I used it for my book.
You do. So what do you think of the professor's distinction?
I think he's right. Look, subject to due process, though, is the ball game, right? One of the reasons why we have due process in this country is because we don't get to know just on Trump's say-so who is a criminal and who's not, who has violated our laws and who's not. We're supposed to have an evidentiary hearing. You're supposed to bring truth and evidence to the courtroom and prove your case. The burden is on the government to prove their case, and Trump is not doing that right now. And so the question is whether or not the courts are going to force him to do that. One thing I will remind people, though, and this is a little bit of this is something I have a problem with the Democrats kind of framing here, is that they're thinking that the constitutional crisis happens only when Trump defies a Supreme Court order. But the Constitution says the judicial power of the United States exists in the judiciary and all inferior courts that Congress creates. So when Trump defies a court order of a lower court, we are in the constitutional crisis. Professor Dershowitz, you once told me a story at Porter Square, Shangshou, the Chinese restaurant Shangshou in Porter Square, about how you, using your BlackBerry, got a judge to issue a temporary injunction grounding a flight that you were on. That is supposed to be the power of a lower court injunction, that you can literally use it on your BlackBerry to tell a plane to stay on the tarmac if they're in violation of the law. But here, Trump has been in a situation where he's received court orders telling him to keep planes on the tarmac, and he's completely violated those orders. That is a fundamental that's a fundamental attack on the power of the judiciary, not just the power of the Supreme Court.
I don't agree with that. President Trump has said he will comply with court orders. In my case, I got the judge to issue an ex parte injunction to prevent an airplane from taking off. They had taken Vincente Fox off the plane, saying that his life had been threatened. I went up to the pilot and said, if his life is threatened on the airplane, my life's threatened. There could be a bomb on the plane. And so the judge issues an injunction. The injunction, he didn't say all planes all over the country have to stop. He said, this plane in Boston, within my jurisdiction, 1 mile away from the courthouse, has to stay still. So I don't think we're in a constitutional crisis, and I don't think we're going to get into a constitutional crisis. We're in a constitutional conflict, precisely of the kind that Thomas Jefferson had with Adams, precisely of the kind that Andrew Johnson had with John Marshall. We've had constitutional conflicts over the years, and our system of checks and balances has proved its ability to create conflict resolution that doesn't result in a crisis. I agree with you. If the President of the United States stood up and said, I am absolutely going to defy, not appeal, I'm going to defy. I admit that it covers me. I admit this. I'm just going to defy it because I think I have the power. He doesn't. That's a crisis.
But that's a nice hedge, Alan, because we'll never hear Trump admit anything that goes to any kind of fault or overreach or anything like that. So that we're not going to see. But I appreciate your argument. Elie, let's do this. I want to have you come back when I finish the book. So I'll try and get a date with you next week to have you come in, and we'll just go over the book, because I'm halfway through it. And it's a very cool idea, and it's interesting. It's called Bad Law, right? You see it on your screen. But Elie takes us through how these laws are shaping society in ways that he believes you shouldn't like. So, Elie Mystal, good luck with the book. I'll have you back again to talk about it.
Bring me back.
Thank you so much, Chris.
I have a new book called Palestinianism, the newest attack on peace, human rights, and democracy. So We can have a debate.
Well, then you're going to have to come back too, Dersh. I'm getting you a date too.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much, Chris. Thank you very much, Professor.
Hey, thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your screen. And don't forget, click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.